Hello, Christy. I provided a, um, a slideshow, but I'm also going to narrate this just to kind of bring the presentation a little bit more to life. So this is my diversity audit on my school's collection. So I thought it would be important to give you some background information about the school and the collection sample. I work at the Bresnahan Elementary School, which is in Newburyport, and the school serves students pre-K to 3, so it's a very young population. We are about 500 students, so it's 500 kids between the ages of 4 and 8, and we are a suburban school district. Technically, we're a small city, but we really look like a suburban school district in most ways. So this is an interesting part of our school's journey. The school building is new. It was built in 2014, but the library collection is actually quite dated because they took 2 elementary schools that were closed and they moved their library collections they merged those into the new library. So even though the building is new, the collection is actually quite dated. And then sadly, as many districts experience, the professional librarian was eliminated in 2017, and they hired a part-time clerk to run the library. And additionally, they cut all budget funding in 2017 for purchase of new books, and the only funds have been through the Scholastic Book Fair that the PTO runs. So those 2 pieces of information, a lack of librarian and a lack of funds, have really impacted what the collection looks like. So I did an analysis in Tidal Wave, and I've just did a screenshot of a part of it. If you'd like to look at it closer, you can look at, I linked it in the slideshow that I sent. But the average age of our books is 2005, which is quite old, and that impacts what kind of books we have on our shelves. So when I looked at the title-wise, it said that our diversity collection was 28%, but having worked in the library for the last year, I feel like that is an inflated percentage, and I'm trying to dig in to figure out why that seems a little inflated. But I also decided to just focus on one part of the collection, which is picture books. This was my focus area, that have humans as the main characters. So I just wanted to explain why I chose that. I'm operating from the belief, as most of us have, that libraries should provide books that are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and that our student population is changing because we have a steady increase in ELL students, and then we had a rapid increase of refugee children this year. So our population is changing both steadily and suddenly at the same time. And our current collection just doesn't represent our changing student population. And it also doesn't allow our long-term students to understand different cultures and experiences. And so that's the reason I chose to look at picture books that have humans as the main character. So the process that I went through to do the audit was that I narrowed down the list of books to those that had humans. I missed a page. I used TitleWise and I created a spreadsheet. And then I went through and I eliminated any books that had main characters who were animals or imaginary creatures. I eliminated books that had no characters, like alphabet books. And then I focused on picture books that had humans as main characters. The sample size was 592 titles, which was actually quite a lot. So after I narrowed down the list, I looked at these 3 areas: gender representation for just the main characters, racial and ethnic cultures, racial and ethnic representation, and then diverse perspectives of these different groups. So I did create a spreadsheet. I will just do a quick view of that for you so you can see it. I've linked it in the rest of the presentation if you want to take a closer look, but here's the titles that I imported. And then I just created these different things, different categories, and I made a checklist. And so if, for example, Catch That Goat, which is actually an African tale, I clicked off what the main character's gender, and whether they were from a different culture, and so on. So that's linked if you want to take a closer look at that. And so once I had that done, I used that data to start analyzing the collection. So my first thing was the gender of the main characters. And you can see that there's a pretty even split between the male and female main characters, which is great. But this is woefully underrepresented. This is books that have a non-binary or trans identifying main character. So that is what that data looks like. I did go to the Mass DOE to get our schools data, and it reflects the pretty even break between male and female. And this data does not actually reflect accurate numbers in our school, but that's a separate situation. So here are my observations: that there's a fairly even distribution of books that have male and female characters, but there is a significant underrepresentation of books that represent the LGBTQ, trans, or non-binary student population. That is significantly underrepresented. My next area was I looked at the race and the culture of the main characters. So these were the races and cultures that I looked at. And this chart does not surprise me, but it is quite disheartening that 396 of the books in the sample audit had white main characters, and that all of these other cultures are very much underrepresented. So that's a very stark chart, and it's disheartening, but it's also very powerful for reasons why we need to move forward. So that was that. I did go and get the DOE's data, and this represents our school's population, which is overwhelmingly white middle class students. But here is our growing population of students who are of different backgrounds. So these are my observations: that there was an overwhelming percentage of the books in the sample had main characters who are white. Did not surprise me, but it's now glaring on that chart. And that we have a woefully inadequate representation of main characters who represent almost every other culture. And that the overwhelmingly white does match our school's demographic, but the collection does not allow our students to learn about other cultures and races. So the collection provides mirrors for the majority, but very few windows or doors into other cultures, and almost no mirrors for those who are not from the dominant culture. And my last area that I looked at was these different diverse populations. And this is, again, a very stark representation that only one book had. This is Julian is a Mermaid, but we have almost no books that represent immigrant or refugee students. And my observations were that we have a completely inadequate representation of the experiences and perspectives of these diverse groups, and that our school has increased its diversity, but we haven't increased our collection's diversity. So my conclusions that I'm going to share with my administration is that the fact that we've had we have not had a certified full-time librarian since 2017, and there's been no budgetary investment, is really now causing our school to have quite an inadequate library collection, and that the diversity audit clearly reveals that we don't have an adequate amount of current high-quality books that reflect the needs, experience, perspectives of diverse populations, and that I'm going to be using this information to ask my administrators for funds to be built into the budget to continually purchase books, and also seeking grants and things so that we can do a massive purchase right away and try to correct it as quickly as possible. So doing this audit was incredibly informative. It was very time consuming, but it also is very powerful, I think, in helping my school to move forward.